I'm Hugh McCabe and I'm a photographer, and this is some of my work that you can see behind me on the wall here. I started doing photography a long time ago, probably 15-20 years ago, and after having kind of experimented with a lot of different styles in photography, it's only really in the last couple of years that I've started working on a kind of a substantial project, I suppose you would say. And this project really evolved from some other interests of mine, which were being involved in music, and I've played in bands all through the years in Dublin as well, so I always had that interest in my life too. And I basically started doing a photographic project which was inspired in part by the work of another artist called Hiroshi Sugimoto. And Hiroshi Sugimoto made a whole sequence of work back in the 70s or 80s, which was shot in movie theaters in New York and other places in the States. And basically the concept of Sugimoto's pictures was to take long exposure photographs which were the length of the film. So he would go and set up his camera in one of these kind of very ornate Art Deco movie theaters in New York, and he would create a photograph which is one exposure where the shutter is open for the length of the entire movie. And they're a really interesting series of photographs. You don't really obviously see the film that's being shown, but what you see is the film being used as a light source to illuminate the interior of the building. And I became really interested in that work, and then thought about how the same kind of concept might be extended to music concerts. So what I started doing was going to gigs, bringing my camera and taking photographs which again were long exposures, but the concept being that each exposure was the length of a song. In the beginning, I wasn't particularly fussy about what bands I was shooting. I would have been a lot more interested in the venue. So I was looking for interesting places to shoot rather than interesting bands. And I was really just photographing whatever gigs were happening that I was able to do. However, as time went on, I kind of realized that mostly the photographs that I found really interesting were also the ones that resulted from gigs that were really interesting too. And I think the first one I did that I felt really worked was the Silver Mount Zion Memorial Orchestra, I think they're called. They go under a number of different names in the Button Factory. And that was probably the first photograph I took that really, there was a sense in which the visual aspect of the picture somehow encapsulated something to do with the music or with the gig that was going on. After shooting gigs for quite a while, I decided that what I wanted to try and do was extend this concept into other sorts of performance. I was really interested in the music stuff as a way of kind of documenting some kind of communal experience on the part of the audience and the performers and so on. So it became as much about forms of performance and forms of events and forms of kind of participative events, I suppose, as it did about music as such. So I was interested in looking at other kinds of events or other kinds of performance which I could shoot, because with music there's a certain regularity of movement associated with the performers. Whereas with something like theatre, you've got a much freer palette of movement on the part of the performers and so on. So in terms of the photographic project as a way of seeing how photography can function as a way of capturing movement, theatre seemed like an interesting thing to try and tackle. Now, what turned out to be, I think, quite surprising about it was that the extent to which, even though the movements are so fluid usually and not fixed to particular positions and so on, it was surprising the extent to which people were still visible within the pictures. So in other words, there were some kind of cycles of regularity going on there, which allowed people, actors obviously, to register in the photographs. I tend to think that one of the more interesting things about photography is its status as this objective kind of image recording device, and therefore what that might then tell us from looking at photographs about this world outside human experience.